Time for business. Owen here. Lots of banks in the frame today, but surely the most startling development, this is HSBC, a multi-billion-dollar money laundering scam. Owen, tell us what this is about.
Stuart, I don't say this very often, but I really don't know where to begin with this one. Huge investigation into one of the world's biggest and most globally reaching banks. This was the US Senate that spent the last 10 years investigating HSBC as part of a wide-ranging inquiry into money laundering into the US, and has concluded and indeed condemned HSBC for facilitating the laundering of billions of dollars into the US. Now, to take a few examples, they say that they've seen illegal cash flowing into the US from countries like Iran, Burma, North Korea, as well as Mexican drug cartels. In fact, pretty much any rogue regime you care to name around the world has been involved with this, and certainly had HSBC's involvement in putting that money into the US. There are around 75 executives questioned as part of this inquiry, and this Senate panel went through some 1.4 million documents over the past 10 years. Essentially what the HSBC is saying is that it was inadequate compliance controls and executives not really applying the law when it came to stopping money laundering.
And as you say, it was a huge investigation going right back 10 years.
Well, at one point they were looking at 17,000 alerts that were given to HSBC over anti-money laundering. So of course this bank could never really say we didn't know. They ignored tens of thousands of these things. At least $7 billion alone was put through Mexico, and this panel says that it had to be involved in financing drug money, or financing the laundering of drug money for such vast amounts to be going to the United States. Essentially, these gangs who were unable to deposit that kind of cash and that volume of cash in US banks were taking it back into Mexico and then putting it through HSBC back into the United States.
What about any defence then? HSBC, were they just holding their hands up?
They've pretty much said, yes, you've rumbled us, no real contention against this. What they've said now is they've promised to double their compliance budget. So in future, staff are well aware of these kind of laws involving money laundering. It should be noted, HSBC aren't the only one. This Senate panel used HSBC as a case study because it is such a huge bank, present in around 80 countries around the world, and one of the biggest banks in the world. Worth noting that Washover as well, one of the US banks, has already been fined around $160 million for a similar kind of fraud. This one was confined just to Mexico.
OK, well, HSBC shares edging down nearly 1% in London. What about the rest of the markets?
Actually, on the upside at the start, Stuart, certainly at the opening of the European bell, at least for most of them, the IBEX is down once again in Madrid, or was down, I should say, at the start of trading. They are back, the Spanish government going back to the bond market for the first time since announcing that $65 billion austerity program last week. On the Asian markets, good day's trading so far. Certainly the Hang Seng up nearly 2% once again, extending those gains it made on Monday.
Well, if you need any proof that the reputation of banking is in trouble, look no further than the Barclays libel scandal. Both the former chief executive and the Bank of England insist they did not approve the rigging of interbank lending rates. But the bank's number has cast major doubts over their version of events. Olivia Salazar-Winspear has more.
He told traders to submit false interest rates, part of a gambling culture at Barclays Bank. Former number 3 Jerry Del Messier testified before the Parliamentary Select Committee about fraudulent interbank borrowing rates. Del Messier says he thought he was being given the green light by the Bank of England and his boss, former CEO Bob Diamond.
Did you regard it as an instruction from the Bank of England or from the public authorities generally in England?
From the Bank of England. I relayed the contents of the conversation that I'd had with Mr. Diamond, and fully expected that the Bank of England's views would be incorporated in the LIBOR submission.
This meant eventually reducing the LIBOR rates with the backing of Bob Diamond, but he says that's not the case, laying the blame squarely at the door of the traders.
When I read the emails from those traders, I got physically ill. It's reprehensible behaviour. And if you're asking me, should those actions be dealt with? Absolutely.
Diamond added that he wasn't guilty, but did feel responsible. The LIBOR benchmark interest rate is set in London and based on estimates supplied by banks. It's a crucial tool for the global markets and can dictate lending rates, for example, borrowing costs for homeowners. Last month, Barclays was fined £290 million for attempting to manipulate the LIBOR and Euribor rates to make the bank appear healthier than it really was. This parliamentary inquiry into behaviour across a number of banks has prompted some to suggest that the whole system has been rigged for the last 7 years.
That's the picture with Barclays and the LIBOR scandal. It's a few wires coming into us here on business just in the last 10 minutes or so. Alcatel-Lucent, the French telecommunications company, its trading was briefly suspended on the CAC 40 a little earlier this morning. That was after its share price plunged nearly 12% after the company put out a profit warning saying it no longer expects to post a stronger operating margin this year, unveiling a third quarter loss. Its operating margin this year would surpass the 2011 figure of 5.6 billion euros. Let's get a few more of the day's business headlines for you now, starting with the IMF, which has sharply revised down Spain's growth forecasts. The organisation says that Spain's sovereign debt and banking crisis will cause the economy to contract by around 0.5% next year. Just 4 months ago, the IMF was predicting positive growth for Spain. Prospects for the US, the Eurozone and China have also been trimmed, though China is still predicted to grow by at least 8% this year and in 2013.
Yahoo has appointed its 5th CEO. In as many years, the struggling search engine poached Marissa Mayer from Google to try to turn its fortunes around. Mayer replaces Scott Thompson, who was forced out after fabricating part of his resume. She begins work this Tuesday when Yahoo reports second quarter earnings.
And Sir Richard Branson is on the verge of buying back Virgin Records, the company that made him. According to the Financial Times, the British entrepreneur is looking at a joint bid with the former head of Virgin's French subsidiary. Virgin, which represents acts like Gorillaz and Lenny Kravitz, was sold to EMI 20 years ago. EMI is itself currently in the throes of a buyout by Universal Records. Now then, Stuart, if my maths is correct, you must have been a teen when the Sex Pistols were in their pomp. Is that right? That was,
no,
of course,
I'm not answering that question.
They were, of course, the band that made Richard Branson. You might remember he signed them to his then fledgling record label.
In the 2CV at the time, probably.
He probably did, because I think he ran a tight budget back in those days. Sold this company back in the early 1990s. As we said there, it perhaps doesn't have the biggest bands in the world right now, the Coldplays, if you like, or the U2s, but still has some pretty good acts. According to this piece in the FT, they haven't really talked figures, although Branson sold this label back in the early 90s for around £600 million. Of course, it's likely to have increased its value since then. But by how much? Remember, a lot of bands these days, they don't make their money selling records anymore. It's touring, it's the festival circuit, it's playing live. That's where they make their money. So it depends on what kind of pull and what kind of draw these bands have that will of course, be included in the price. But it's all very complicated. You've got EMI in the throes of being bought out itself. Do they want to let go of what is maybe not an iconic record label, but certainly one with lots of history?
I was going to say, the history, I still can't get over the fact that he doesn't own it anyway. So there you go. Just an old-fashioned kind of guy.
But he's a man with an eye for a good bargain, so at the right price, he might well go for it.
Maybe he will. All right, Owen, thank you very much. Owen, back with business, of course, tomorrow morning. And Lorna has the latest news. Do stay with us. She's here right after the break.